George from Ireland, so welcome back to my channel. And this is just to inform you that I've just published a book entitled Shelley, a Bicentennial Homage. It's a series of personal musings on perhaps the foremost romantic poet of all. So I'll tell you a bit more about the book and I'll give you a brief recitation of a goblet from it. So Shelley is someone who's fixated me since my adolescence. I've known a little about him since I was perhaps 8 years old. So this book is partly biography, partly just my reaction to him, a little more about romanticism, and it gives a synopsis of some of his poems. This certainly isn't a scholarly treatise. There are no footnotes, no ibids, no opposites, that kind of thing. So it's not couched in that unreadable scholarly prose. Yeah, so I strive to do justice to him. It's about 50,000 words long, relatively short, and comprised of both primary and secondary sources, with quotations from many of his poems. I briefly consider some of his essays. I try to show the man, warts and all, to use that very hackneyed Cromwellian phrase. So I reflect on his attractive traits, on how he was such a troubled youth. I also don't stint in talking about his debilities and his really unalluring side to him, and I speculate as to his mental health. I give some potted biographies of the people he encountered. So I strive to contextualize Percy Bysshe Shelley, and it really is a labour of love. So you can buy it on Kindle. It's got no ISBN. I've never published something on Kindle before. Something's been published for me by another publishing house. So the whole title is Shelley, a Bicentennial Homage, Personal Musings on Percy Bysshe Shelley. It's published on the 1st of August. So be one of the first to buy. It's £8.15 because it's no nonsense. It's really writing. That's my medium, not the visual arts, and therefore there is no cover. I don't know if I can go back and set up cover. There's actually no ISBN, which is maybe a mistake, and not to put one in because it's easier to find. So I'll tell you what. I mean, I'll just read you a bit of the opening of this book about Percy Bysshe Shelley by me, which I wrote over a few months really. Just dipped into it. Started as a short article, expanded, and it's been subdivided. It's got lots of subheadings for the different chapters. It's got roughly 10 chapters of about 5,000 words each. It's uneven. Okay, so here's the opening. July 1822 marks 2,200 years since Shelley breathed his last. Sorry, that's going to be July 2002. Though Percy Bysshe Shelley died at the age of 29, he is one of the most widely appreciated poets of all time. He died without much money or recognition. He'd only sold a few hundred copies of his poems by the time he perished, but his posthumous reputation has secured him his place in posterity. It is a thing of wonderment that one man can produce such a treasure of literature, though he had all too short a lease of life. His Elysian eloquence secured him a place in the pantheon of great poets. His literary apotheosis is assured by The Mask of Anarchy and Ozymandias. The Monody Adonais is perhaps his magnum opus. Reading his poems is one of life's inappreciable benisons. He was a poet par excellence and an essayist extraordinaire. His exceptional expressive powers are never to be forgotten. The brilliancy of his spectacular oeuvre can never be fully extolled. Shelley's verse is renowned for its vivacity and flawlessness. He expresses sentiments and observations deftly and in crystalline language. The sublimity of his oeuvre has given pleasure to countless millions down the centuries. There is no doubt that he was superlatively gifted. His artful metre and the musicality of his words are peerless. His sensibility and his enjambment of images are superbly evocative. His creativity and freshness, even when he addressed himself to seemingly jaded and well-worn themes, were magnificent. His avoidance of cliché was remarkable. Although he was an avowed atheist, his masterly poems have attained for him a literary immortality. Shelley's work is orotund, ornate, and perfectly formed. He captures the right cadences every time. The godlike clarity and perfection of his verses is uncanny. His mind was incessantly teeming with thoughts and ideas, like a silvery river full of leaping salmon. Percy was blessed with a phantasmagorical poetical gift. His work ethic enabled him to compose poems that were light enough to be pleasurable, yet phrased with the utmost significance. His productivity was staggering, and Percy paid close attention to every single phoneme. A single word can even be the spark of an inextinguishable thought. This superlatively talented poet never composed an unmelodious verse. He is the compositor of some of English's most memorable lines. Though he received few eulogies in his lifetime, there he sits in the poet's pantheon atop Mount Olympus. He walked the earth for but 29 summers, yet has attained immortality. He shall never lapse into non-being. So that's just that. This is the first two paragraphs. Perhaps a little bit too repetitive. Even then, I noticed some errors. Of course, he died in 1822. It's 2022 that marks the bicentenary of his death. So a bit of an introduction and referring to some of his most widely recognized works, and saying what themes that he tackled, and yeah, so giving you some notion of his personality. And then a bit of a biography, a bit of a family background. His father was a Whig MP, Timothy Shelley. His grandfather, Sir Bysshe Shelley, that's where the surname comes from, had been born in New Jersey, had married well twice wealthy women, and become very affluent, started building Castle Goring in Sussex. That's a county in the United Kingdom on the coast due south of London, and so on. Well, I tell you a lot about his situation, the political setup, the economic setup, the position of the Church of England, and so forth, and what schooling was like in the late 18th century, early 19th century as well. And a lot about Bishop Percy's psychology. Much of this is necessarily conjecture. All right, and then about Romanticism, that artistic and intellectual movement, which had started going perhaps under Jean-Jacques Rousseau in the 1770s, and was really coming into its own about the time Shelley was born, and actually didn't survive Shelley very long. So it's that artistic movement that succeeded well in poetry, the Augustan poets, and saying it's all about feeling, not just thinking. Hello, Robert Kelly. Yeah, so plenty of quotations from Shelley, not incredibly long ones. And so telling about his family situation and who his friends were, and then I tell you how I came across Shelley. Mr. Black, my class teacher, on his little read us Tripods, that novel, and there's a character in it by the name of Ozymandias, the only Ozymandias I've ever heard of. And then Mr. Black said, well, that actually refers to this very well-known poem by the renowned wordsmith Percy Bysshe Shelley, and then he read it to us. So that's why I was wonderstruck from then on. Anyway, thank you for listening to me. So make sure you buy my book, and what else? Other things to bear in mind. Oh yes, subscribe to me. On Patreon. Thank you for donations on PayPal. George Callahan 79@gmail.com. Check out my website, which is called George from Ireland. Thank you. Goodbye.